Jeremy Kuzmarov, the professor, is here with us. How you doing, Jeremy?
Pretty good.
If you're listening out there on the radio, thank you so much. I think this show is so important, Jeremy. There's so many reasons why we have to do an LOL segment, left on left criticism, and we do it. As we laugh out loud to keep ourselves from crying. But there is some important things out there too to discuss. Right now, I think the best thing to discuss before we get started on this segment is who is really the lesser of two evils, right? We're sold this two-party illusion, right, that we need to get out of. So when it comes right down to it, and I've said this before, Donald Trump or Joe Biden, and I had a friend of mine, he used to be a friend of mine until the Israeli situation popped off, and, he's anti-war, but, I mean, this whole Gaza situation with Palestine has really made people show their true colors. He's not really talking to me at this moment right now because he's so upset about my opinions about what's going on. But it is important, I think, to point out the lesser of two evils here. And I would say it openly that Donald Trump is the lesser of two evils. And I only say that not to encourage people to go vote for Donald Trump, because I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump. I'm going to vote third party, and our election system is whacked as is. But is it okay to say that? Is it a fair assessment to say, Professor, that Donald Trump is the lesser of two evils? And even though we are leftists and traditionally the Democratic Party has been the party of the left, we have to just simply stop supporting these warmongers. I mean, World War III is closer than it's ever been, and it's with Joe Biden in office, not Donald Trump. Professor.
Well, I mean, it's a matter of opinion. People may have different opinions on that issue. There's certainly a phenomenon of Trump derangement syndrome, which I think is dangerous, to blame all problem in American politics on Donald Trump. I think that's what we see, in the MSNBC crowd. You see that even in the Nation magazine. And, to think that, the reelection of Joe Biden is going to be, saving the country, I don't know. He's brought us into disastrous conflict in Ukraine that's seems to be escalating. The military, I have an article coming out on China. And, the U.S. has been reviving runways from World War II and all these Pacific islands, and signing agreements with the governments of those islands and investing billions of dollars to revitalize runways so that they can, including in Tinian, which is where the Enola Gay bomber flew to attack Hiroshima. So, I mean, clearly they're planning for a war with China, and, Biden is signing off on these huge military budgets. So, I mean, he's certainly a cancer. I mean, you can make a strong argument Trump is a cancer as well. But the Trump derangement syndrome focuses only on Trump, when I think the problem in American politics are systemic. It has to do with the corporate takeover of government, the way elections are funded. And I think people on the left and progressives have to challenge that and not just be fixated on Donald Trump.
Well said, Professor. Well said. I do believe that too as well. I mean, listen, some people think it's a lost cause. A lot of my friends said voting is a lost cause. Electoral politics is a lost cause. They think it's better if we just get out to the streets and just do what we have to do, because we're never going to change anything with elections, especially when they present, not only just our election system, the framework and the processes that we have to deal with. And I mean, some people just came back from Russia and talking about some of their elections. Wow. I think people have to understand why Putin got 87% of that vote. It's very, very important to analyze that. And I think if we had the same type of representative here in America, that person who would be for America, not for the corporations, and, hand us this lesser of two evil argument, which we're going to break into it. The guy we're going to talk about today is Bernie Sanders, right? Who constantly says these things. Let's play the first video right off the bat of Bernie Sanders once again selling that same thing. Donald Trump, Professor, is the most racist, misogynistic president of all times. And if we don't stop him and we allow him to get in, then we are all doomed. We are letting fascism in the door, and it will be a big problem. I mean, look at where we're at today. Look at what we're getting. And if we still continue to play, there's an old saying, you play cocky games, you're going to win cocky prizes, right? I have to say that because we can't say the curse words, but it's the truth, man. I mean, how long are we going to continue to play this you-know-what game? It's awful. We have to hold the line somehow. And I know a lot of people are going to still throw that out there. There's people out there like David Pakman, Randy Rhodes, these free speech television people, right, that are not about free speech. They're sitting there supporting a party that is in the bag for censorship, for silencing us. A party that's run by the CIA. I mean, both parties are two wings of the same vulture. But let's play this Bernie Sanders clip real quick and give me your thoughts, Professor, on this continued rhetoric by Bernie Sanders.
This election is of extraordinary importance in so many respects. It is important because we are running against the most dangerous political figure in the modern history of this country. And I just want to make it clear to people what a Trump victory is about. I think sometimes we slouch it off. Trump does not believe in the concept of climate change. So what does that mean? It means not only that all of the work we have done in trying to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel will be undone, but every other country on earth is going to say, hey, if the second largest emitter in the world is given up on trying to transform the energy systems, we're not going to do it either. And that really means dooming our kids and future generations to a very, very unhealthy, perhaps uninhabitable world. So you don't need to know anything more than that to understand how dangerous Trump is. But obviously, the danger is much greater than just that.
I had somebody call me once, Jeremy, try to sell me the argument, and I was trying to search for that argument of where is Biden actually better than Donald Trump? In my announcement, my intro for Pasta to Go, I talk about it all the time. Name me one area where Joe Biden is better than Donald Trump. Now, I think you can make the argument maybe for Latin America, right? Donald Trump exiting the Oval Office just last week there, he labeled Cuba a state sponsor of terrorism, which was totally just crazy and off the wall. I mean, there's like 2 knife stabbings a year there in Cuba. It's a totally different society. And he did continue the same policies that, Barack Obama had in play, and Bill Clinton and George Bush and everybody who's been so awful with, supporting the Monroe Doctrine in Latin America, which is really leading to our migration process. Root cause. I know people are saying, well, they destabilized that country. Now they're going to destabilize our country. Root cause, baby, is what's going on. And we have to just address this and hit this on the nose. Let's bring up the next article really quickly before we get the professor involved, and it talks about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, because I think that at one point you can make the argument, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I met Fiorella Isabel when I was doing the Bernie Sanders campaign, and we were together in the streets marching for an economic path to sovereignty for workers in this country, right? We didn't get involved with the culture wars, and we understood that race was an issue, but we understood the biggest thing on the table, the biggest thing on our plate was these economic wars, right? And giving people money, giving people a livelihood, making it okay so people can make a living would ease the race tensions in this country, Professor. But I mean, Bernie Sanders claims the mantle of FDR, who was once again a pro-worker president, or is at least perceived to be. Has he really earned it, though? And I want your opinions on that, Professor, because I think that was the angle. And I think there was also a big difference between 2016, when he would go into West Virginia and talk to Trump voters, and then 2020, he bought all into the culture wars. He completely bent the knee to the Democratic Party. There was that whole situation in 2016 when he told people to go vote for Hillary Clinton, and they were booing him. And he was, brothers and sisters, please. And they were booing him for the first time on that campaign trail, because I think a lot of people expected him to go into the convention and fight. That's what he told us we would do, and he didn't fight. He instead bent the knee. Your thoughts, Professor?
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment. I think he might have been more effective. He claimed to be leading a political revolution, and then really it was clear that he was just trying to draw his supporters into the fold of the Democratic Party and to support the corporate Democrats. And now, he's using this kind of fear-mongering about Trump and the threat of fascism to get people to vote for a Democrat when the party's not delivering. So a lot of people see that he kind of sold out. I mean, he might have been much more effective since they railroaded him, running as an independent or situating himself as an independent and leading a real revolution against the corrupt 2-party system, and really trying to revitalize the democracy and encouraging social activism and the regeneration of social movements in America to fight for some of the principles he was advocating for, like free healthcare system and challenge to the corporate oligarchy. And I think he'd been very weak throughout his career on foreign policy issues, and that's what I go into in this article, because I compare him.
Kosovo, right?
Yeah, Roosevelt and Wallace. Franklin Roosevelt, and especially he's especially bad on Russia, because Franklin Roosevelt was a visionary who restored relations. The Woodrow Wilson administration invaded Russia after the Russian Revolution, poisoned U.S.-Russian relations, but Franklin Roosevelt was a visionary who restored positive U.S.-Russian relations in 1932, furthered that cooperation in World War II, then supported the Yalta Agreements, which is a spheres of influence agreement after World War II that would have paved the way for world peace and no Cold War. Henry Wallace was Roosevelt's vice president, trying to continuing that policy. He was removed in basically a coup d'etat in the Democratic Party. And ever since, the Democrats have supported a hard line on Russia. And Sanders has continued that. This article has all these statements he made condemning Russia, promoting Russophobia, supporting NATO expansion, supporting a hard line against Russia, and he voted for military aid appropriations to Ukraine. He was among those standing and cheering for the tyrant Volodymyr Zelensky when he came and addressed the U.S. Congress. And I mean, that's another area of sellout, because there's such pressing social needs here at home, and to achieve the goal of like a free healthcare system, we shouldn't be investing billions of dollars in Ukraine, but Sanders evidently thinks we should, and you can't have your guns and butter, and Bernie doesn't seem to understand that. So he really doesn't live up to Roosevelt and Wallace, who were really visionaries and promoted a peaceful relations with Russia as a pathway to a peaceful world order.
And everybody should go check out that article by the professor in his amazing Covert magazine. Go check out Jeremy's work. I mean, the article we're going to get into later is just so juicy. We talked about it before this show. It's a juicy article, and that's what Jeremy produces, juicy articles. All the information is there. It's like an encyclopedia of knowledge. And, just kind of going back to what you're talking about, Bernie Sanders, I remember him in 2016, and the link is in the chat, by the way. Remember him in 2016 when he was talking, and he was doing, I think it was a CNN town hall. I'm not sure what it was. But he starts getting into this kind of bashing of Donald Trump, and he stops and he goes, right? Like he stops there and he goes, throw it aside. Like let me stop. And I'm not going to sit there and bash on this guy. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do for you, the worker, how I'm going to help you out. And it was this genuine moment. It was like why we all looked at each other and said, this is why we're supporting Bernie Sanders right here. This is why, we're getting behind him. But the question I want to ask you really quickly before we get into the big question, because I think the litmus test for a lot of leftists is Israel-Palestine, right? We pointed out certain things and applauding Zelensky and whatnot. And, when you heard people talk about Bernie Sanders and Israel, and so much of the 2016 election, nobody had to answer questions on Israel-Palestine. 2020, nobody had to answer questions on Israel-Palestine. I was constantly following the Tulsi Gabbard campaign. I wish I could get into a time machine and go back and question her right there on the spot. And that was the whole thing that RFK had to deal with. I mean, I caught RFK in New Hampshire way before October 6th, and I asked him his question on Israel-Palestine, right, his situation, his stance, and that was front and center. And a lot of these politicians have had to be front and center when it comes to Israel-Palestine, is when 2020, 2016, Bernie Sanders really didn't have to answer for his stance on Israel-Palestine. But before we get to that, I mean, do you think that Bernie Sanders was threatened in any way? I mean, there's that famous Donald Trump video when he was talking about, Bernie Sanders is the only guy I didn't want to run against. Was Bernie threatened to bend the knee like this? And this is coming from our good friends at Indy at INN. And I was going to ask that question anyways. That's what great minds think alike. But Donald Trump in that famous video, when he talked about the only guy he didn't want to run against was Bernie Sanders. And he talks about a moment when Bernie Sanders are all of a sudden straighten up and fly right when he did. And, Donald Trump says, well, they got him in the locker room. They told him what's what. And there was also all of a sudden all these threats to maybe put Jane Sanders, his wife, who we know, I love my wife so much, threatened to maybe put her in jail for all that malarkey going on with funding that she maybe have taken for the whole school scandal, and I think they kind of framed it as, Donald Trump people going after her, but it seemed like the establishment was going after Bernie Sanders. Do you think Bernie Sanders was threatened? And does that justify his position nowadays? I mean, he's only human if they say they're going to kill one of your family members or something or do something harmful. Jeremy. Professor, what do you think?
Well, I don't know about that. I've heard that rumor also about Robert Kennedy, that they have something because of his sex life or maybe connection with Epstein, and that's why he's adopting such a hard line on Israel and is, in support of Israel, and has compromised himself. I don't know. These are theories. I don't have any proof of them. It wouldn't surprise me, but to learn about it, but I don't know. I mean, what we've seen in Bernie throughout his career, though, is that he's actually a very cautious and calculating politician. I mean, I think he was actually used by the Democratic Party to bring younger people into the fold of the party, because the party was growing stale with Clinton and some of the leaders they had. And here was this kind of populist rabble rouser, and people were following him. And he had a track record going back to his time at Burlington mayor of fighting for certain progressive causes. So he was actually a very effective instrument of the Democratic Party. So I think he was working in collaboration probably with the elites all along. It was just kind of a charade. I mean, a lot of politics is a charade, and politicians are good actors, really, the good ones.
And it's only minimally effective when they do this thing, right? Like we were seeing RFK's rally the other day. It's not as many people as it once was. I mean, Dennis Kucinich was on TV at one point talking about his campaign, and it was going like this. Then we had the Israel-Palestine situation, and the plane flattened out and was slowly kind of on an angle going down. Now with this pick of VP, it's like he's done. I mean, he's done. I don't even understand. Like even the people, and don't get me wrong, the things her biggest issues are very important. And with things I were excited about, RFK getting to speak and changing the rhetoric on the campaign trail. Let's talk about our food, how it's processed, how it's made, how it's poisoned, how we're a sick nation. I mean, he spent a history of taking on a lot of the industry itself and exposing them. But now you're going to pick somebody who was the ex-wife to the creator, I think it was Moskovitz, I'm not sure, of Google, and also somebody who has ties to Event 201. What are you doing? And she's not popular at all. I mean, I guess the wooing of Tulsi Gabbard, the wooing of Tulsi Gabbard by the Trump campaign. Come speak at Mar-a-Lago. Speak about the radical left. I mean, she had a little thing going on at Mar-a-Lago. But let's play this first video right here. Let's get into because I don't want to waste any time. You mentioned the sheep herding by Bernie Sanders. Yeah, but when I was saying it only works minimally, because a lot of us were like, we're not playing your game. We're out. Goodbye. We're never going to go bend the knee to the left, the Democratic Party the way you do, because it's not a leftist party, and Bernie Sanders was the compromise candidate at that point. Like you said, calculated moves when it comes to foreign policy. So he was the compromise. We were willing to deal with his bad decisions of the past, especially of Kosovo, right? But we weren't going all the way. So it only works minimally, the sheep herding and whatnot. I think RFK is more about crushing, like Sam Husseini says, more about crushing the anti-established movement and splitting it in half, because we have people, anti-imperialist leftists like myself, who were going together and bonding together with a lot of these, populist right who were against the COVID protocols and understood it for what it was and looked at it as a bioweapon. I mean, we didn't believe it came out of bat soup in Wuhan. But I mean, him is more about crushing a movement, and Bernie Sanders could be that. We're just throwing theories out there, but I think it only works minimally, Professor. But let's get into some of the stuff you brought to the table, because we only got a limited time here. Let's talk about Bernie Sanders and his decisions about Israel. Here's Norm Finkelstein. We'll play a little bit of this, and we'll stop it as it goes along, and we'll get the professor's opinions about Bernie Sanders on where he actually stands on Israel-Palestine. Here we are.
You support a humanitarian pause in Gaza. Some of your fellow progressives say that there should be a full-on ceasefire, which would require an agreement on both sides to halt the fighting. Do you support a ceasefire? And if not, why not?
Well, I don't know how you can have a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, with an organization like Hamas, which is dedicated to turmoil and chaos and destroying the state of Israel. And I think what the Arab countries in the region understand, that Hamas has got to go.
Okay. My name is Norm Finkelstein. I heard Bernie Sanders statement this evening opposing a ceasefire. I had planned to spend this evening reading, so I've fallen dreadfully behind in my reading. And unless I keep reading, I can't bring anything fresh and important to what's happening now. But I was so furious at that remark of Bernie's, where he said he opposed the ceasefire, and my innards start to writhe.
Okay, pause it right
I
there.
Decided...
Let's stop it right there. I mean, we unfortunately, since we have a limited time in a segment, and Norm Finkelstein moves at the speed of cheese, very slow, we have to give our own analysis. But Professor, you can see Norman Finkelstein say right off the bat, like he had other things to do that day, but he had to stop to go into this. What is this humanitarian pause that these politicians keep throwing out there? I mean, what is a pause? Pause means you're just going to stop for a second and go back to doing what you're doing. And also, Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. Your thoughts, Professor?
Well, yeah, it's kind of a cop-out by politicians. They don't want to actually, cut off arms supply. I mean, to get Israel to stop its horrendous atrocities against the Gazan population would require a ceasefire, would require halting weapon supplies, it would require imposing sanctions or an embargo on Israel. As actually Dwight Eisenhower imposed sanctions during the 1956 Suez crisis that forced Israel as well as Britain and France to back off when they tried to invade Egypt after Nasser had nationalized the Suez Canal. So there are things they can do, but it's a very cowardly position, and that's what Finkelstein goes on. He calls Sanders a coward, that he won't even call for a ceasefire, let alone harsh measures against Israel that could actually block it and save many lives. We're talking about thousands of human lives at stake here that could have been saved. So it really is an act of political cowardice by Bernie, and that's why Finkelstein was upset. But it fits within his career. Jeffrey Sinclair of Counterpunch wrote a very good book on what he called the Sandernistas, and he went back when Sanders was the mayor of Burlington. He was evicting anti-war. He brought in the F-35, and then when he was a senator, in Vermont, he brought in plants to manufacture the F-35, and he was quicker than his predecessor to throw out the anti-war activists out of his office. So,
oh yeah, he was, and at the town hall too as well when he had them shush. Put up that article, the Bernie and the Jets one, really quickly, just so we can take a look at it. Where we got about 2 minutes and change left of this particular segment, but Hamas. Can you give us a little bit of thoughts on Hamas? Because first of all, I mean, listen. One of the best things that when I was on the Jimmy Dore show and I was hosting was with Kurt Metzger, was like, here they are, Netanyahu, and is early back as 2019 saying in a meeting with all his politicians and his lawmakers over there that they have to fund Hamas. And he's like, and just to think about it, I gave up on Hamas in 2014, and here it is, Netanyahu still has faith in them right now. But people still throw this Hamas argument out there. I've heard what's her name, Rashida Tlaib, talk about we don't support Hamas and stuff like that. People are very small-minded when it comes to Hamas. Can you give us your thoughts on the cop-out about Hamas? And the fact is that what choice did a lot of the people in Palestine, especially in the Gaza Strip, have when supporting Hamas, as opposed to, what are they supposed to do? Say no to Hamas and support their oppressors, which is the Israeli government? Go ahead, Jeremy, Professor.
Well, I mean, I think there are ugly features of Hamas rule that would be legitimate to criticize, but Finkelstein makes the point in that talk that they're not addressing the root cause. They're making like Hamas just woke up one day and wanted to attack and kill Israelis. And I mean, there's been a process for years where the Israelis, have laid siege to Gaza and brutalized the population that would facilitate their anger. And also when Hamas won, I mean, this was facilitated in 2006. Hamas won elections that were held, and they were punished collectively as a population for electing Hamas. And it's also forgotten that the Israeli leadership, Netanyahu and others in the Likud party, supported and empowered Hamas because they didn't want to deal with the Palestinian Liberation Organization.
Yeah.
They didn't want a peace process. They walked out of it.
And this is something that Ron Paul says on the floor too, Jeremy, right? I don't mean to interrupt you, Professor, but this is something that Ron Paul says on the floor way back when about the fact that they're supporting Hamas. We can't do that. Listen, the timer is up. You can hear the bell going. So we just need your final words right now. We understand Bernie Sanders where he was on foreign policy. We understand where he is when it comes to Russia. We understand where it is when he supports Zelensky. We understand right now where he is when he kind of uses the Hamas excuse and the humanitarian pause. So, Professor, I just need your closing words on Bernie Sanders. Sell out for real or same old, and why it's important that that we don't play this stupid game because we don't want to win stupid prizes. Close it on out, Professor.
But I would say people on the left, should not look to false messiahs for their deliverance, but should develop independent social movement, independent of the two-party system, and work for change in their communities and in developing broad mass-based movements that could change the outcome of U.S. politics, and not devote themselves to false messiahs like Sanders or AOC or Robert Kennedy or any of them.
Yeah, that's it. You play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. You heard it right from the professor's mouth. I am Craig Pasta Jardula, the captain, here with the Professor Jeremy Kuzmarov. You're listening to LOL.